Hey guys, this is Coach Steve here, coming to you on what is the first live chat. I'm not sure if I'm going to continue to use this format for this, but I wanted to bring you this review of Hard Lessons from the Hurt Business by Ed Latimore, Boxing and the Art of Life. I just finished recently the first read through of this book. Ed Latimore is an author, a former professional American heavyweight boxer, a competitive chess player, and the founder of Stoic Street Smarts. Lives and works in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. This book, Hard Lessons from the Hurt Business, is Mr. Latimore's third book, I believe his first fully published book. His first two books were self-published. I am not sure if they are still available. If they are, that would probably be through edlatimore.com. At his website, edlatimore.com, you'll also be able to find the sign up for the Stoic Street Smarts newsletter. So this book is published in 2025. Actually, I believe just came out in August. This was published by Portfolio Penguin. Portfolio is an imprint of Penguin Random House, based out of New York. It's just shy of 300 pages, with about 13 chapters. This book essentially is probably one of the first biographies or autobiographies I have featured here on the channel. I'm not entirely sure if you guys are interested in autobiographies, but I feel like with his work in the field of Stoicism and putting out content regarding self-development and personal growth, that this boxer's biography was very relevant to what I'm doing here at the channel. But as a biography, it does start at the start. It talks about his childhood and upbringing in Pittsburgh, actually specifically living in the projects in Pittsburgh. He had, by all accounts, a very rough upbringing. As a matter of fact, the book starts with author's notes, and one of the first quotes here in the author's notes from a Hal Adonis, the president of USA Boxing from 2009 to 2012. And this quote from Mr. Adonis: "When kids call me up, I say, let me ask you an honest question. If your parents ever hit you? If they say no, I say, I don't think you belong in boxing." So right there from Mr. Adonis, the president of USA Boxing, to set it up, if your parents haven't beat on you, then you probably have no place in boxing. Which gets to why Mr. Latimore did very well in boxing. Going into his early childhood, it was a little bit tumultuous growing up with a single parent in the projects. He gets around at the end of it to the importance of forgiveness. Actually, in the epilogue, your past does not define your future. But taking it from there, he talks a lot about making the changes in his personal life as a young child that allowed him to be in a better position to create the future and the life that he wants. Again, it was very possible growing up in the projects that he could have gotten stuck in that circumstance. In some of the early chapters, talking about his experience in public schools in the projects, he talks about a few incidences of real world violence, of getting bullied, of being chased around by kids, of even having some less than bright ideas, which almost wound him up in legal trouble, basically in the school to prison pipeline, as they were calling it. The cops were actually, fortunately, kind enough to give him a warning and tell him, listen, you would have tried this out on the streets, bud, you might have not have survived. That this move you were making was not a good or safe or bright one. You got to turn this around. And he realized, yeah, the cops were right, actually. He has heard stories of what happens when you start to wander a path that is less savory in life. But yeah, throughout it, I mean, this book as a biography does hit on several intersectional parts, some of which are his story as a boxer, some of which do get into his interest in stoicism and the efforts he made to push through this really difficult journey. And he talks a lot actually about the people he came up with boxing. He originally started with locals there in Pittsburgh, eventually got picked up by a very big up and coming project out of California, actually the All American Heavyweights, which was financed and put together by a Michael King. Michael King, whose name you may not recognize, but you probably would recognize the work he has done. Michael King was behind things like Wheel of Fortune and Jeopardy and the Oprah Winfrey Show. So when he had went out to California, Ed Latimore, to join with this All-American Heavyweights, this was a very serious project that was being financed, and they pretty much gave him free housing, free training out in California. And that was when his career really started to take off. He went from, by his own admission, being a guy who was tripping over his own feet in the boxing ring to starting to really get recognized. Actually, his story of meeting Michael King gets into the concept of, isn't it funny how the harder you work, the luckier you get? He had met Michael King when he was pretty much out for the Pennsylvania State Golden Glove tournament. And as a part of representing Pennsylvania in this Golden Gloves tournament, he had ended up fighting probably one of the highest ranked people on the circuit for that event and beating them. And that Michael King may have been out there initially to scout the fella he had beaten, meaning had luck given him an easier opponent, that whole thing of going to California with a sponsorship may have never happened, which is one of the important Stoic lessons. You've got to put in the work. You've got to put in the time. Things aren't going to fall in your lap, that you don't get recognition until you've done the work, right? Mr. Latimore easily could have went back with a Golden Gloves victory and not had the same trajectory had Mr. King not taken notice. But it eventually gets around to things out in California went as far as they could until they didn't. At some point in time, you are only as good as your last win. And when you're no longer winning as a boxer, that really does complicate things. In this, he gets into the background of boxing as a profession. I've heard boxing coaches before use the terms, it's a real hard way to make an easy buck. Because let's face it, if you're losing fights, you're not getting money. And if you need money off your boxing career to pay your rent, then losing fights doesn't work. So, yeah, he did find as time went on that boxing can be, despite your love for the sport, a very difficult one to make a living off of. And that in the end, you run a risk of not just getting hurt, but getting injured and having to know the difference between being hurt and being injured. In some cases, you get smashed in the face, it hurts. In some cases, you get smashed in the face, not even in a professional event, but just in a sparring context, get a blowout fracture in your eye, and could be told, yeah, it's not safe for you to train or take any more hits for months on end. And that's as a result of training, not even a full on event. So, after finding that it's difficult to find sparring partners, sparring could result in injuries, he talks a little bit about how All American Heavyweights was able to put him through to Rock Nation Sports. And if that name rings a bell, it is because Rock Nation Sports was a subsidiary of Rockefeller Records. Yes, that Rockefeller Records with Jay-Z. So at some point, Mr. Latimore was actually boxing on a televised circuit sponsored in part by Rock Nation Sports and Jay-Z. So, yeah, you can even look on YouTube and find Mr. Latimore's performance in that event. But in this biography, he eventually gets around to the efforts he made to then stabilize his potential for a career, how he eventually joined the National Guard and had to overcome not just his own personal fears from growing up of things like lightning, but an even more important struggle to overcome his addiction to alcoholism. He actually admits that he was heading down a path of not just drinking daily, but drinking alone and starting to actually do this in a way that was negatively impacting his ability to show up at the gym, to really be present, to the point that coach even pulled him aside and said, listen, if you're showing up here drunk, I don't think you're serious. We're done for the day. Like, and that's when he realized, yeah, my drinking is now going to possibly cost me my boxing, and that is not a place in life I've ever wanted to be. So with that, he eventually did start to turn it around. But that was after, again, months of sobriety and basic training for the National Guard, really putting in the hard work. He talks a lot about that, especially in the chapter, You Only Have to Get Unlucky Once to Ruin Your Life, which is where he gets into almost having an issue with coach over showing up drunk and realizing, again, injuries, serious injuries could occur, not just in the ring, but in training. This book is really good, though. Honestly, Ed Latimore is a really intelligent dude. The one thing I would have loved to have seen more in this book that I didn't really get enough of was a discussion of his transition from boxing into content creation and his writing work. He talks a little bit about authoring the two books and having ran, I guess, a blog post in his early 20s, but that was not quite yet the Stoic Street Smarts newsletter that he's doing. So that's about the only information in the book through his life that I don't think got featured very heavily. Everything about his childhood, boxing career, his time in the National Guard, his time actually transitioning from a guy who wasn't doing that great in college to a guy who was actually tutoring AP calculus, and he was able to get really good with math in order to be a tutor level expert on the subject by getting back to basics. He talked about how relearning math and getting back to basics was the same way he learned boxing, of getting back to basics, getting the footwork, all the fundamentals down, because everything builds upon the previous lesson, right? If you don't understand addition, you won't get multiplication, you won't get fractions. Everything builds upon the prior lesson, right? If you've never been on a date with a girl, then you don't have the prior lesson for the long-term relationship with the girl, etc., etc. So yeah, to wind it down, I would definitely encourage people to check out edlatimore.com, to look for him on YouTube, and to sign up for the Stoic Street Smarts newsletter. I'm going to try to leave links in the description. I'm not sure if this live format will allow me to leave them links in the description. But yeah, his channel has a lot of great videos. He's got a couple of years worth of uploads on his YouTube channel. And he's got this book, Hard Lessons from the Hurt Business, which was just released and is really wonderful. Again, mostly not doing biographies and autobiographies on my channel here, but I thought there was a lot in this book that really was worth talking about. And if you guys are interested, I don't know if you'll be able to leave a comment after the fact, but there are other biographies or autobiographies from athletes that I did happen to take notice of in passing and would be willing to consider picking up, reading through, and reviewing for you guys. As a perfect example, specifically, I had seen a book from, I believe it's Hoist Gracie, who was recently diagnosed with Parkinson's disease and has a book that he co-written with another author about applying his experience with jiu-jitsu to this health battle. That was something I felt might have had a lot of messages of courage and resilience, if you guys would be interested to hear about Hoist Gracie and the contents of that book, or any other sports psychology or biographies of athletes. Until then, I'm going to say I'm really glad I picked up Hard Lessons from the Hurt Business by Ed Latimore and have read through this biography and brought you guys some of the information. Again, there's a lot in here about the efforts that one would make to change their life from, again, a kid growing up in poverty in the projects with a future trajectory that does not look bright or promising, to a fella who is holding awards, literally getting sponsorships, traveling to California, living his dream, and even going on to eventually retire from boxing, be married, have a child, and to begin a successful career as a content creator on YouTube. So, yeah, I hope this encourages you to check out his book and to keep working hard at whatever it is you're striving towards, because transitioning over from a guy with a dream to a guy who has lived the dream and can now write a whole book about it is put in the work. Until then, I'm encouraging you guys to reach out to me if you have any need for coaching or want to discuss anything in a more private way. You can email me at joyandsuccesscoaching@gmail. And till then, you guys take it easy. I'll talk to you soon.